so this is our evening virtual session, really tailored to lead education, lead prevention, and really honing in on the resources that we can get families connected to. And so, sorry, there we go. So my name is Hannah. I am the Healthy Homes Program Manager at Women for a Healthy Environment, our nonprofit. We're located right in East Liberty in the city, but we convened the Get the Lead Out public awareness campaign and the Lead Safe Allegheny Coalition. And so I'll be speaking tonight with a few of our other speakers, and I'm excited for them to introduce themselves. So Dr. Francis.
Hello, I am Dr. Pamela Francis. I am a board certified pediatrician. I actually work at the main, my company's name is Primary Care Health Services, but I focus my practice at Alma Illery Medical Center and the Wilkinsburg Family Health Center, which is in the Hosanna House. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. We're happy you can join us this evening. My name is Karen Schaefer. I am the clinical director at the Alliance for Infants and Toddlers, and I worked in home visiting for years, did behavioral health. So I've had some opportunities to do work in this field. So we are happy to have you join us tonight. So just a little bit of overview, what we're going to talk about this evening. This is our Lead 101 presentation. So if some of you joined us this afternoon for some of the speakers, some of this may be information that you've heard or just a different lens of thinking about it, but we are happy to have you. And if you did not get the opportunity to have that participate, we are really happy to have you if this is new to you. So we're going to talk about what is lead, where can lead be found, who is at risk, what are the impacts on our health of lead, what it looks like in Allegheny County, what can we do about it, and resources for families.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. So before we dive too deep into what this looks like in Allegheny County and what those health impacts are, like Karen had mentioned, we kind of want to cover the basics of the common sources of lead exposure in our home and in our built environment. And so we think about it in a few main pillars, that being lead-based paint. And so homes built before 1978 having a risk of lead-based paint in those homes, dust that's then created from any deteriorated chipping or peeling paint, soil. So, thinking about their soil in our environments and maybe where demolitions have occurred or near high traffic roadways. A big one that we're probably all the most familiar with is probably lead in drinking water. And so that's primarily through the fixtures. So the service lines that connect the public and the private side, as well as, the different fixtures that we have in our home, like our faucets or different things like that. And then a more, kind of unique route of exposure, source of exposure, but we do see sometimes as well is things like, old passed down wooden toys, old jewelry, different glazes on pottery, imported spices, different things like that. Another big one being, certain hobbies, whether you're working in or occupation. So whether you're working or, like to do things in renovation and repair or stained glass painting, different things like that, that aren't those, more common sources of exposure, but are still something to think about, especially in our home and in the toys and products that we use. So we'll hone in on these a little bit more. One of the first ones that I mentioned was lead-based paint. And what that looks like in our homes is, you see this picture on the left, that's a pretty, severe condition of lead-based paint and chipping and peeling paint. It looks like it's probably on an outside shed or near or along an outside window. And that's typically common in homes that were built before 1978, but primarily built before 1950. And so 1978 is kind of this number that we use to assume some type of lead hazard in homes. And that's because that was the year that lead-based paint was removed and banned from being used in the residential space. And so we kind of use that as a proxy to kind of assume where there might be some lead hazards. And so we think about that here in Allegheny County. We're not unique in a lot of ways, but we do have really old homes. We have really old housing stock, really old infrastructure. And so that lead-based paint is really important and something that is one of the most primary, the biggest sprout of exposure is that paint and then the dust that comes from that the paint that's no longer in good condition. And so if you think about that, and you look at this window and you think about the other spaces in our home, I live in an old row house in Lawrenceville, and I have painted old wooden windows and wooden frames and old baseboards and old doors. And so when you think about the areas where you're creating friction and where that paint is no longer intact, you're creating dust, and that dust is actually one of the primary routes of exposures for children is direct ingestion of lead dust. All of these exposures that we'll talk about are all important, but this is something that we really do think about because we do just have such a high volume of old homes. And so the key takeaway here is, chipping, peeling, crocodiling, whatever fancy adjective we want to use to basically say that that paint is no longer intact, can not only then be a lead-based paint hazard, but then also a lead dust hazard. And lead dust is so fine that you can't actually see it. But it is really helpful to know, where to prioritize some of those cleaning methods that we'll talk about later in this session, but really just knowing, those high friction areas where you're opening and shutting doors, opening and shutting windows. That's where we're really seeing, the hot spots for lead dust as well. And so, like I'd mentioned, the one that probably most of us are the most familiar with is lead in drinking water. And many of us probably seen a lot of this in the news, back in 2016 and, recently, specifically around, lead in drinking water and the crisis that we, saw go down in Flint, Michigan. And that really brought a lot of public awareness to, lead poisoning and specifically lead in drinking water. And so, that's something that we deal with in any old city with any, old deteriorating infrastructure. So not only was lead widely used in paint, but it was also used in, different products that we built around our infrastructure. One of those being the lines that carry the water from the public side into our homes. And so those lines used to be leaded. Lead was a product that, was malleable, it was long lasting, it was something that was widely used, but it was also incredibly harmful to human health. And we'll get to that whenever Karen and Dr. Francis share a little bit more about that. But the common misconception that we just want to make sure that we highlight here is that it's in the fixtures. So it's something that is, basically those lines you see in the visual here that connects the public line to the main, and then the main to the private water service line, is that those were leaded, and that lead then can get into our drinking water, and that's what we're consuming, the water that comes out of our pipes in our homes. And so that's really important to understand, is that one of the big things that we want to make sure that we highlight is that that's the primary source of getting lead in our drinking water is through the fixtures. But one of the big things that water authorities are making a commitment to now is doing full lead service line replacements. So if you live in PWSA service area or are familiar with some of the work that's happening in Wilkinsburg Penn Joint and now even with Penn American, they're committing to doing in some capacity with some of the federal funding and state funding that they have to do what's called a full lead service line replacement. And that's where they replace both the public and the private side. And that's really because if you're only going to replace one side, you're going to actually cause a temporary spike in the lead levels in the drinking water, which can be way more harmful than had you just left them alone. Another thing that water authorities are using in some capacity, PWSA has definitely been doing that since about 2016, is using what's called corrosion control, which really just helps that lead stay in the line and not get into the water. So that's just something to think about. Another route of exposure due to our old and aging infrastructure being, the service lines and the fixtures that we have for our drinking water. One caveat before we dive any further is that, we're spending a lot of time talking about the sources, but we're also going to spend a lot of time talking about what we can do about that. So this is kind of the all in your face around, what that looks like in our home, but I promise we'll get to what we can do and what some resources and next steps are. But another thing that I had mentioned, was soil. And so thinking about, one of the big things is really around where demolitions have occurred. So where you've seen old blighted properties, where you've seen them come down, that's a good thing in a lot of communities that, where those homes might have been a safety hazard. However, if that's not being done in a lead safe way, that lead dust will just end up sitting in those vacant properties and in the nearby yards where that property has been taken down, which can actually cause really high levels of lead in our soil. especially in, areas that, like I said, are in, near, or around where demolitions have occurred. Another thing that we can, kind of think about too is that we have hills and valleys in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, and so we used to have lead in our gasoline. Only till about the 1980s or so did we not. And so if you go to the gas now, if you go fill up your gas, you see we buy unleaded. That's typically what everybody's buying. But we used to have lead in the gasoline that came out in our emissions, and those settle, in our soil and in different areas of our geography. And so it's another way we can kind of think about, especially if you are in an area where you're near high traffic roadways, that would make, higher levels of lead in soil more likely. And so thinking about these different sources of how we typically get lead in our soil, one of the other things that I'll just highlight is through some past industrial sources. And so thinking about where lead smelting has occurred in proximity to that, especially where we think, where families are and communities are living and where homes are. And so really the big thing with when we talk about soil is bare soil and soil or any place where you're using your soil to garden or create food. And so those are really the important things that we want to, think about. And again, we'll cover what that looks like typically and how we deal with that. But that's really kind of the big thing. So bare soil is really the key takeaway. If your soil is covered, or you just laid grass seed, or you have wood chips or anything like that, that would be, considered a lead safe environment. And like I had mentioned, there's kind of this more unique routes of exposure. We already kind of covered this, but one of the big things that I just wanted to highlight is that, none of us did anything for this to happen. This is typically, part of the manufacturing process or through, a different route that the lead has gotten into these different products or in the different, things that we're using in our home. But there is, some resources on that. One of those being is that we actually have an XRF machine, and we can provide testing of different things like your dishware and old toys that you might have had for a really long time and you're just unsure about. And so thinking about these different, other more unique routes of exposure is also important as well. And lastly, one of the other ones that we'll kind of cover is different things like jobs and hobbies and things like that that, can lead to higher levels or higher exposure to lead. And we kind of talked about that a little bit, but one of the really big things here, and that we'll make sure we highlight again at the end of this session, is around renovation. And so if you're somebody that works in construction or renovation or repair, it's really important to think about not only protecting yourself and your family from those hazards, but really thinking about how you contain your workspace in the spaces that you're renovating for lead dust. So if you're working in a pre-1978 home, really thinking about, protecting yourself from consuming and ingesting the lead dust and inhaling the dust, as well as minimizing the spread of dust. Like I said, we'll cover a little bit more about what that looks like specifically for contractors, but if that's just something you like to do, you wouldn't know that that's, a more unique route of exposure for lead. So I will kick it back over to Karen and Dr. Francis to really hone in on the impacts of, lead poisoning on our health.
Thank you. So I think one of the reasons, and Hannah alluded to this, when we're thinking about things like lead dust or soil, the reason that children are so vulnerable is by nature of what they do as children, right? Developmental milestones. They're crawling on the floor. They're putting, their fingers in their mouths. They're literally ingesting dust and other things or soil. I know my son loved to put goldfish on the window seals. So you think about that, if we were in a home with lead, he could be just basically dipping them right in there. So I think thinking about what makes kids vulnerable is important. Even the fact that they're built low to the ground, right? So they're closer to the dust, they're closer to the places where, they are going to be breathing it in or touching it or having some level of exposure, which again makes them vulnerable because they're still developing. Their brains are growing, their bodies are growing. We know that there is no safe level of lead exposure in children. We know that in rare cases, it can cause seizures, coma, death. I don't think that's normally what we see, and Dr. Francis can talk a little bit more about that. But I think we want to remember that childhood lead poisoning is 100% preventable, and that's really what we're here to talk about today, so that we can help people understand the importance of a lead safe environment. We know that exposure can lead to damage to the brain and nervous system, learning and behavioral problems, issues in school. Sometimes, oops. Sorry about that, guys. I broke my wrist and I don't have the best fine motor skills right now. So I'm still working on OT, friends. Heat, hearing and speech problems. And I think the other concern we have is, again, these concerns may not show up until later. So it's important to really be aware of this now when kids are young, because there might be concerns about lower IQ or decreased ability to pay attention or underperformance in school. And by the time that we understand what's happened, children have already been impacted by this.
I think one of the things that's really important also is that is to visit your pediatrician or your healthcare provider as often as expected, especially when kids are young, because we do a lot of milestone developmental evaluations, and that's the perfect time to catch a lot of this also. The thing that, like Karen said, there is no safe level of exposure to lead. And the one thing that if you're concerned about your kid, if you're concerned about their health, or if you've had an older kid who's had exposure to lead, then it's really important that you contact your primary care doctor and make sure that they are evaluating your child for lead exposure, because lead can affect pretty much all of their development. So it's really important. And there's some short-term exposure problems that we can see too, if kids are coming in with chronic headaches or abdominal pain because of ingesting lead, or if they're having other constipation, fatigue. Those are things that we also kind of pay attention to possibly. And if it's in that age range where we're most concerned about it, then those are things we also look for as well. Not just also the severe things, but it's some mild symptoms that can lead us toward a concern for a possible lead exposure as well.
Thank you. I think the lesson, be prepared, not scared, right? Ask the question and really, again, keep those appointments and ask. If you're not sure, ask. If you're wondering, ask. Because I think that's the most important thing, to be educated and informed. So we know, again, the health impacts on children could be damage to the nervous system and kidneys, problem solving, memory, learning delays. Again, those things may not show up until later. So a child could be exposed, when they are young, when they're in that infant toddler stage, but it doesn't show up until kindergarten, and you may not even track it to that early lead exposure. At being at risk for lower IQ, ADD or ADHD, hearing, speech, language delays, behavioral concern, decreased muscle and bone growth. Lead is an opportunist, right? It'll push out the good things like calcium and iron and kind of take over. And I think, I've had families say to me, oh, my child used to have lead, but they don't anymore. And, you want to say, well, they still have lead. It's gone somewhere else in the body that maybe it's not registering in the same way, because it really doesn't go away. It is in our bones till adulthood. I grew up in the city in North Point Breeze. I am sure that it is in my bones and my teeth, because at the time the levels were much higher where that was acceptable.
And let's not forget that kids can have no symptoms and still have the effects of lead happening within their bodies, and it may not show up until they're older. And that's really the reason why we do testing for them so young. We do it at minimum age of 9 months, unless we need to do it sooner because of a possible exposure, but we do it twice. We actually do it between 9 and 12 months, and we do it again at 2 years. And that's just to give us a baseline. So that if there is an exposure later on, we have a number to go by. But believe it or not, we catch a lot of kids who've been exposed with high lead levels, and they have no symptoms at all. So just because your child does not have any symptoms does not mean that the lead is not having an impact on their bodies internally.
Thank you for bringing that, because I think that's really significant, especially at some of the lower levels. People may not realize that it could be a concern at some point along the line.
Yeah.
So I think that's really one of the reasons that we're doing this 101 tonight, to really educate people.
Exactly.
So we know that there's impacts on children, but there can be long-term impacts on adults as well. I mean, it really is lead across the lifespan, right? People that have been lead poisoned might have greater risk for high blood pressure or fertility problems or miscarriage, preterm birth, nerve disorders, memory, concentration problems, decreased kidney function. All these things, again, may be a result of lead exposure at a different time in an adult's life, but you might not even be aware of that.
And it's also important to remember that lead can actually cross through the placenta, and it can affect the unborn baby as well. So if there is a concern for lead with a child, and you are pregnant or possibly are planning to become pregnant, then it may be important to have a lead level done on the parent as well.
And again, talk to your doctor if you have a concern, or you know that it's in your family, or if you have a child, you already have a child that has a high lead level and you are expecting, talk to your doctor. So this slide, I'm not going to go over too much, but I always feel that it's important because it looks at the number of IQ points that are lost in terms of children being exposed to lead. It's a high number, in the millions when you think about it, in children in the United States. And I think personally, I don't have any IQ points to lose. I don't want to give any up. I don't think that our future generations should be giving them up either, especially these days, right? These are our future decision makers. We want them to have all the IQ points. So we have no points to lose. So Dr. Francis, could talk a little bit about how you see this in your practice?
Thank you. Yes. So in my practice, I see numerous kids, which is my favorite. I see from 0 to 18, and the majority of the kids that I see do not have any symptoms, even the ones with high levels, and they're actually pretty normal, which is great. But some of them, you can see it affect their mental state. Depression, hyperactivity. You can also see it in kids that have abdominal issues. If the levels are high enough, or if they're actually eating it, it can show up on x-rays as in constipation. I've seen that before, where you send them in to have an x-ray and they see lead in their abdomen. So we've in a couple of times, and it was truthfully, it was not even my patient, it was another colleague's patient. He was just doing just a normal 9-month kid. He was doing just checking a baseline lead level on, and it showed up. It was an extremely high number, but it was based on dad's occupation. He worked with stained glass, which we saw earlier is a hobby that leads to high levels of lead exposure. So, and so in my practice, we see it, and then the main thing that we do is we follow up on it. We get them the treatment that they need. Thankfully, I've never had to have somebody get the levels have never been high enough where I had to have them admitted to the hospital personally, but I have read up on patients that have had to be admitted to the hospital because their lead levels were so high that they needed to have the confirmatory test redone, but also have them treated in the hospital. And at our practice, we really kind of stay away from doing just the finger sticks. We do a blood lead level, which is the confirmatory test, because your finger stick can be extremely high. As you stated before, children they play around, they touch everything, they go from hand to mouth, they play in dirt, they play in the corners of your house that you tend not to sweep on a daily basis. If you have peeling paint, that's the place they seem to want to go. In spite of having all the expensive toys in their house, they tend to want to play with things they shouldn't play with. You may find some old toys that was in grandmother's attic or grandmother's basement, which were no one knew that was full of lead. And as with kids, we know they'll touch them and share it with others. So in my practice, we see a lot of older houses with peeling paint. I've seen a pretty much, not as much anymore, but we are still seeing it, and we're seeing a lot of kids that are there's no way to determine what the lead levels, where it came from, unless it's, drinking water or, like I said, peeling paint is really the thing I see the most. And for us, when a kid has a high lead level greater than 5, then we follow them up, we treat them, we kind of manage them closer, and we check their lead levels over time. And the CDC has a guideline that we follow based on the lead level itself. And it's really a guide that helps us to determine when we need to repeat test and when we need to admit them for chelation or blood therapy, which would require, if it's a high enough level, you may have to have a procedure where the lead is kind of removed from your system manually. So, but for the most part in my practice, what we see patients that have just a relatively, it's not really high, maybe like a 9 or 10 in that area. And so we just kind of monitor them, follow them in the practice to see, and we watch that level trend down over time. I have not had anyone over the age of 6 that we've still been monitoring for a high lead level. Everything has pretty much been under that, under 6 range.
That means you guys are doing the work too. That's why. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we know that where we live really kind of is indicative sometimes of the amount of lead that we might be exposed to. So Pennsylvania ranks 4th in the United States for total housing units before 1978. In Allegheny County, we're an old city. More than 80% of the homes were built before lead was removed from paint. 41% of the homes were built before 1950, when lead-based paint was used more frequently. I mean, you think about what you think about as a Pittsburgh house, right? It wasn't built in 1980, right? So we have a lot of older communities. We have aging infrastructure. I mean, and that contributes to, the lead exposure. So this is a map of our county, and it is the percent of children under 6 who were tested with confirmed venous elevated blood lead level. So that's the blood draw that Dr. Francis was talking about. So that's a confirmed blood lead level. And so I always say to people kind of where are you on this map? Where are you in the county? Or where did you grow up? Or where did someone that you love or your grandchildren, like where are you? And you can see the concentrated areas are more like in the Mon Valley area, closer to the heart of the city, is where the highest concentration of children impacted by lead are living. And here is a fancier map, different colors. This actually is part of the census tract up to 2021. So it's the most recent map that the Allegheny County has on its website. But again, you can see, where the higher percentages of children impacted by lead are. So as Dr. Francis mentioned, we talked a little bit about the testing. So Allegheny County actually now requires that all children get tested for lead exposure at approximately 9 to 12 months of age, and again at 24 months. So that really aligns with your well baby checkups, right? It's not something extra that you're doing. It's something that's included in the regular visits. So keep up with those regular visits and you will be in line with the timeline. If your child's confirmed blood lead level is at or above 5, then the housing department and community environment program will contact your family to offer you a free voluntary lead-based paint investigation to identify potential sources. That is a little bit different than what the Center for Disease Control and Prevention has just recognized as now the blood lead reference value. It went from 5 to 3.5 just in April of this year. So it's in response to the Exposure Prevention and Advisory Committee, and I apologize. The recommendation was made on May 14th, but Allegheny County and us at the Alliance Early Intervention adopted it in April. So again, here's just some data that shows the children by year in Allegheny County under 6, how many children were tested, how many children were confirmed to have a level of 5 and above, 5.9, or 10 and above. And you can see there's some variation. There was, the banner years where 2018, 2019, and then it dipped a little bit in 2020, 2021. I think we all know what happened there. We had that pandemic thing happening. I think fewer children were going to the doctors. Not as many children were getting their baby checkups. They weren't able to follow that timeline. So I'm anticipating there might be some catch up. I don't know, Dr. Francis, what are you seeing with your practice?
You are right, Karen. During 2020 and actually 2021, we did see a decrease in people bringing their kids in for well visits. So we did kind of miss some of those opportunities to check lead levels on those well visits. We are trying to catch them up as we see them. Some of them are still apprehensive about coming in, even though it's a little, I would say safer to come out now than it was initially with COVID. But for the most part, those that are coming, when we check lead levels for most kids, we also check their blood count. So I actually kind of phrase it in the form of, we're going to make sure your baby's not anemic also. So then they're more understanding of doing the lead level and doing the blood count at the same time. So it's just all about how you word it in order to get people to be more receptive to it. But yeah, we are catching everyone up. We're back on the increase right now. That's long story short.
Great. Well, and hey, we all know presentation is just about all of it, right?
Especially dealing with parents and their kids. Yeah, you have to give a reason why something is important. And I really believe in making sure parents are comfortable with the tests that we're ordering, because you have to make sure that they're comfortable. If not, they will not agree to it.
Yes. And this has been, unprecedented times, right? Scary times. So I'm sure parents need even additional reassurance to, do what we thought was pretty normal, prior to 2020.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you all. I before we moved on, I just did want to flag this one more time, just because it's really important, and there's a lot of numbers on here and it can be a little confusing. Like Karen mentioned, we're just kind of key takeaway. The reference value now by the CDC is 3.5 micrograms per deciliter. In Allegheny County, the health department is only doing those home investigations, so a home lead test, if it's 5 and above. So your pediatrician will probably flag it at 3.5, but you're entitled in Allegheny County specifically to that free home lead test when it's at 5 and above. So I just did want to flag that because we threw a bunch of numbers around and wanted to make sure it was clear. And so another kind of regulatory body that exists around, some of this more primary prevention part of lead is the renovation, repair, and painting program. And that is federally mandated and implemented by the EPA. And so basically this is a lot of words to say that when you're doing any kind of repair work in a pre-1978 home or child occupied facility, that licensed contractor is required to have this RRP certification, which basically means that they're certified to do the work lead safely. And like we had kind of talked about that earlier, one of the key things in doing, lead safe work practice, having lead safe work practices is really containing dust. And that's super important, and really making sure that, if you are a contractor or you're looking for a contractor to do work in your home, make sure that that's something you're asking them that they have, and asking them that that's something that they're familiar with. So just wanted to flag that that is something that is a federal mandate for all contractors. One other thing that we want to flag, just because we work really closely with locally Community Justice Project with their Pittsburgh branch, and that's really around understanding the rights as a tenant when it comes to lead as a habitability issue, but also lead as a health hazard. And so there's some protections under the PA state law under the warranty of habitability, but we also locally have a county housing code that does require certain repair and remediation efforts, typically referred to as interim controls, that those are required that the landlord do if there is a child in the home that is flagged with an elevated lead level. So that falls in the same part of the health department that does those home lead tests. So really the key takeaway here is that if you rent or you work with renters, there is protections under not only the state law, but our county housing code to require there to be certain repairs done where there is an elevated lead level in the home. So just know that that is something that we can help families get connected to more resources on. But I do want to flag that, sometimes it can be a little defeating to not know as a renter what you can do about, the home space that you're in. And so know that, we do have resources here specifically in Allegheny County and locally with our connection in our partnership with Community Justice Project. And so really the big thing when we, I think we've all said it multiple times, there is no safe level of lead and lead poisoning is preventable. And that's really, really key. And we want to make that shift into prevention. And so we don't want to wait for a child to get, poisoned by lead and to get flagged in Dr. Francis's clinic with an elevated lead level. We want to create a safe environment before, families are in those spaces. And so, our work within the Lead Safe Allegheny Coalition and within the Get the Lead Out public awareness campaign, we really want to make that shift into primary prevention. And one of the things that we can do that we think about here locally with the recent passage of the Pittsburgh lead safety law is addressing lead proactively in the different sources that we talked about. And so thinking about, creating lead safe environments before we put families in them and doing that, through by requiring testing to be done in homes, specifically in rental units before families move in. Thinking like we had mentioned demolitions occurring that maybe aren't done in a lead safe way and we're not containing, the space for dust. So thinking about requiring certain wetting methods and certain requirements when we're doing demolition. Another thing we already just mentioned is really implementing and enforcing the lead safe work practices when we think about home repair and renovation. One of the big ones that we already talked about, when it comes to lead in drinking water is doing full lead service line replacements and really, making sure that our water authorities aren't just replacing partials and aren't just doing, the public side, that we're really making sure that we are protective of our communities. And one of the last things that we'll spend a little bit more time about that we can do in our homes right now, whether you rent or own, things that we can do to really specifically help when it comes to lead dust is really thinking about where we can prioritize lead safe cleaning. And again, we'll spend a little bit more time talking about that in like one more slide. But one of the things that, if you leave here with anything, we have this this fact sheet available on our website and also in multiple languages as well. So if that's a resource that you would want to get connected to, we'll put this link to the PDF in the chat. But really, this is like 10 things you can leave here tonight that you can do in your home, or one of them you can start with. Pick one, and it's small steps can really go a long way. And so we covered most of these already. I did want to flag a few though that we maybe didn't cover, didn't explicitly say yet. We talked really, a lot about paint. One of the best things that you can do in a home, especially as a homeowner or even as a landlord or a property manager, is maintenance. And that's across the board, not just in lead, but maintaining paint can really go a long way and can be much more cost effective than having to go back and, do a full on repair. One of the big things that you can do around drinking water is getting connected to and using an NSF certified water filter, especially if you're preparing, formula or food or anything like that, and you're unsure of the lead in your drinking water, unsure of your water quality in general. If you're looking, you can buy this at any store, Target, Home Depot, Amazon. Just look for that NSF designation. Again, most of these we covered already, but really I think one of the big ones that we want to make sure that we're covering is making sure that we're getting our children screened and tested, that looks different in different clinics. In Dr. Francis's clinics, she primarily does the venous draw. In other clinics, they might still do the capillary first draw and then do the confirmatory second draw, depending on what that capillary test reads. Whatever it looks like in the clinic that you're in, make sure that that's something that if you didn't have your child, if you're unsure if that happened, make sure that's something you're asking your pediatrician or your provider, because if it's not covered, if you're uninsured or underinsured, Allegheny County specifically does have resources through the immunization clinic downtown through the health department where that service can be offered for free as well. So again, key takeaways here, this, 10 things that we can think about, when we end this Zoom call, and you can, start with one of them. But really one of the big things, especially in older homes and especially in homes where, we're unsure of, maybe the maintenance that's happening, or routine maintenance that's maybe not happening, but something that can be really impactful, especially, near those high friction surfaces, like I'd mentioned, along the windows and along doors, is really thinking about the cleaning methods that we use. And when we say lead safe cleaning, it really just means, wet, keeping those surfaces wet, not dry dusting or, dry wiping, because really you're just going to move that dust from one part of your home to another. So really is thinking about, where we can, using, wet paper towels, wet cloths, hot soap and water. You don't need a whole lot of, cleaning products. Most of it can be done, routinely with, really sudsy, soapy detergent or water, and hot water. And really just, thinking about those spaces that we're in, the parts of our room, of our home that we spend the most time in, especially where children are spending the most time in. And really, like I said, it's really thinking about using those wetting cleaning methods in those spaces. And so we have some resources on this. The CDC has more information on this, but that's kind of a key takeaway. If you live in a pre-1978 home, you're like, what the heck can I do now? Lead safe cleaning can really go a long way. Again, we mentioned most of these already. All of the resources that we're referring to here are also on our Get the Lead Out site. You're getting a lot of information in this, this hour. So know that whatever we're covering here, those resources we have live links and everything like that on the Get the Lead Out site. And we'll make sure that we include our contact information if you want, more information on any of the services or resources listed here. I'll flag a few specific for Allegheny County. If you're in the PWSA service area, you can request a free lead, a free water test for your lead and drinking water. You can do it right on the website. It's super easy. They mail it to you, and you do the first draw of the water and you mail it right back. So know that that's a resource. I already plugged Community Justice Project, but I'll plug it one more time. If you work with renters, or you are a renter and you're concerned about lead in your home, or you have a child with an elevated lead level, know that there are legal resources and, any kind of guidance that you might need to navigate that space that can be a little difficult. And those can be hard conversations to have with a landlord or a property manager. Know that we have services that we can, get connected to. One other thing that I did just want to plug, our organization, we have a few different services. They're all listed there, but I did mention this earlier before, but we do have an XRF, which is a fancy word basically that says that it's a tool that can test surfaces for lead and other heavy metals. So we can offer that service for things like toys or dishware or pass down, jewelry that you might be concerned about. So that's something we can plug to. And then we talked about this many, many times, but I just want to make sure we all kind of take this, make sure that this is one of the key takeaways, is that if you live in Allegheny County and you do have a child that had an elevated lead level over 5, make sure you're opting into that free lead test. It will be really helpful for us to hone in on, where the lead hazard is and how we can remediate it and how we can create a lead safe environment in the home. And so make sure it's a free program in Allegheny County. So make sure you take advantage. And Karen, I'll let you plug all the early intervention stuff.
I was just going to say, if you have a child that's under 5 and has an elevated blood lead level, you are entitled, your child can have a free developmental screening, depending on their age is going to determine where you go. If you are under 3, you would contact the Alliance for Infants and Toddlers to work with my fantastic team. And your child would automatically be eligible for early intervention at-risk tracking. That's one of the recognized risk categories. They can be followed from, I mean, we have children that we get, not for lead, but they're referred from the NICU. So up until age 3, and they can stay with us because again, that's a recognized risk category. If your child is over 5, then you, depending on where you live, if you're in the city of Pittsburgh, you'd reach out to Pittsburgh Public Schools Early Intervention, or if you are in the county but out of the city, you're going to go through the Allegheny Intermediate Unit Preschool Early Intervention Program, and they also offer developmental screenings. They don't have the at-risk tracking program the way that we do, but you can request a developmental screening to kind of figure out where your child is developmentally and reach in it, if they're reaching the milestones. And I know that Dr. Francis, said that they're looking at milestones as well. This is what we do. We do it a little bit more in-depthly, so we can piggyback on all of the good work that they're doing as far as in that developmental realm.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And Dr. Francis, any other resources that we didn't plug yet that you want to make sure we make sure everybody is aware of? Or did we get them all?
Oh, I think you have all the resources that I am aware of as well.
Perfect. Okay, great. And so for anybody local here in Allegheny County, we just want to plug a few additional resources. Not only can we do things in our home right now, but this is a program that's HUD funded, but operated through the County Economic Development Department. And basically, this is a lot of words to say that it is free lead-based paint repairs in homes, specifically homes built before 1978. And there are some eligibility requirements, but it is for renters and homeowners. So if you live in Allegheny County and you live in a home built before 1978 and you meet, the income guidelines that are listed here for this HUD-funded program, absolutely, take advantage of it. It's a really great program, and it's specific to lead-based paint repairs. And so Jen Sachs and the ACED program is a part of the Lead Safe Allegheny Coalition. They actually spoke earlier today. And so if you have any questions about, what this looks like, how to get connected to it, reach out to us. We'll be sure to put the link to that in the chat too. But again, this is a resource that's also listed on the Get the Lead Out site. But just make sure, some people don't even know that this exists. And so if you or people or families or friends or anybody like that, make sure that they, make sure you're sharing this program with them. And again, this is kind of like the catch-all of what those resources are for testing and remediation. Really, the big ones, getting your home tested. If there is a child with an elevated lead level, part of this program is not only the repairs, but before they do the repairs, they do also a full lead test of the home. So basically the acronym for that is LIRA, L-I-R-A. So you might have heard that term or heard somebody refer to it that way, but that's a lead test. So you get a full LIRA done, and then they'll do basically create a scope of work for what needs done in the home based on the hazards that were identified in that lead test. So that's kind of what that key takeaway is there. One more thing that we kind of alluded to this when we talked about, lead safe work practices, is really thinking about, in the last few years, we might have had a lot more time at home than we had previously. And so, a lot of people were thinking about the projects and renovation projects that they, had been putting off for a long time, which is really exciting. It's always a fun thing to do some new work in a home. However, if you're knocking down a wall and you don't really know, how to do that in a lead safe way, it can really lead to, a higher risk and rate of exposure to lead in the home, especially if you have young children that are crawling around like we've all talked about, and you might have just done a knock down a wall in a living room or anything like that. And if you're not thinking about containing that lead dust or cleaning the workspace properly when you're done, that can really leave behind a big mess when it comes to lead. And so if you're someone who likes to DIY, that is really, really great. Just know that there's resources on how to do that lead safely. So this is a fact sheet that's also available on our website, but there is a full, fuller, more comprehensive guide on the EPA website that is specifically made for, DIYers, flippers, people that do this more as a hobby or do this more for themselves. Then, if you were a licensed contractor, you would be required to have that RRP certification. So this is for the people that, are just handy and they like to do that kind of work, but want to do it lead safely. So know that there's resources that exist for that, and know that if you aren't super confident in your ability to do it, let's help you get connected to an RRP contractor. So we did include that here, just, as more information. One other thing that we are excited that we've been able to do just last week actually is the unveiling of some data visualization through an art project that we did in partnership with a local artist, Janelle Young. So really, we just included this here because it's just recently, in recognition of Lead Poisoning Prevention Week that we, did the unveiling for this. So this is a mural that's actually, you can go see it right on Maddock Place, right downtown across from the Benedum Center. So next time you're downtown, with the holidays coming up and you're downtown for something fun, stop by, take a picture, tag us in it, put it on social media, spread the word that there is, this mural there, and it actually has multiple QR codes that will link you to the Get the Lead Out site for more information. And so just wanted to plug that this is a very recent but exciting addition to some artwork downtown. And lastly, I think we're all kind of tag team, wrapping up a little bit. But Karen and Dr. Francis, I'll let you kind of start with, the key takeaways here that we want to make sure people leave with.
Well, I think Dr. Francis said it, like, get your child's, keep your well child appointments, follow the timeline, talk to your medical provider, make sure that you're getting those tests done, especially if you're still playing catch up, make sure that you're able to do that. Give us a call if your child has an elevated blood lead level of 3.5 or above. Contact the Alliance for Infants for Toddlers. If you have a child under 3, they are eligible for at-risk tracking. It's at no cost to families. And hey, a little early intervention never hurt anybody. Get your home tested. I'm just going through them all, Hannah.
That's okay.
If lead hazards are present, find the source, right? Find the source. Get them under control. Maybe you need to raise this with your landlord. There's resources that Hannah plugged. I mean, there are ways. Again, be prepared, not scared.
And I just always tell people, if you're unsure of where to start with your pediatrician. We have a lot of information about lead, and that's a good starting point. We can refer you to Alliance for Infants and Toddlers. We can refer give your information to the health unit to get things started for testing. And that's it. See your doctors.
Hey, that's important. And that's a great key takeaway. So, I echo everything that everybody said. Just know that, this can be a tough place to navigate. It might, like Dr. Francis said, it's hard to know where to start. There are a lot of resources here. If you saw anything or want more information, know that you can contact anybody that was on this webinar today. We have a form online on the Get the Lead Out site that if you have a specific question you want to ask or specific resource you want to get connected to, you can also fill that out online there as well. But just know that there's plenty of resources, plenty of people that want to help you get connected to these resources. And so know that it's not a space you have to navigate on your own. And so I think we, for the most part, from what I can tell, I think we answered most of the questions that were in here. A lot of people were sharing some really great resources in the Q&A and in the chat as well, which is awesome. We'll be sure to capture those and be able to share those out with the recording. But I think we got to everything that was listed in here. But if you do have any questions, our contact information is here. Please reach out and know that we want to be a resource. And thank you for spending an hour of your evening with us tonight. I know that that is not always an easy thing to do, but I hope you leave this conversation with some, really important things you learned, but also know that there's a lot of great things happening and great work happening and a lot of resources that we want to help you get connected to. So thank you. Thank you to Karen and to Dr. Francis for being a part of this great session. And I hope you all have a great rest of your night.